access to everything. So that's something you can do, and it's good for all ages as well.
Labor Day weekend, of course, the last long weekend of the summer. It means back to school is just around the corner. And there's a church that wants to help students out, right?
Yeah, so the St. Paul Lutheran Church is having an event on Saturday from 9 to 12. So all you have to do is bring your student card in, and you get free access for first dibs to all of the furniture and back to school supplies. I think it's amazing. And it's called a university unsale, so there's no money involved. They're giving it away. And then after 12 o'clock, if there's still leftovers, it's going to go to the public. So this is an amazing opportunity to get your back to school stuff for free.
An unsale, we need more of those.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Saron. Have a great weekend.
You too.
That's kind of fun.
Yeah. Start off with
We had no idea that was there. Just the next day, someone said, "Did you see the news last night?" I'm like, nope. So that was fun. All right, so we are going to be beginning soon the second part of our study, The Meaningful Life. And just by way of review, so last week where we kind of ended, this is our summary. In the back of your little handouts here, in the very back pages 14 through 15, there are summaries in 16, summaries of each section. Because I know some of what we're going through might be the first time you've talked about these concepts in these ways. So I'm trying to produce some cliff notes right at the back there to kind of help you if you need to refresh, see where we've been. And this is our little summary for lesson 1. Meta-narrative that includes God. What's a meta-narrative? Someone refresh our memory. This is the most important non-biblical term that we will be using when we talk about it. Meta-narrative.
Isn't it sort of the overarching story or the overarching...
Yeah, right.
The overarching message, the overarching story.
Yeah, right. So each of you, we could think, has your own narrative in this world, in this chapter called your life. And so in the book of life, you might be one chapter, right? Or you might have a role that you play over a couple of them. But in the grand scheme, the giant book, there is a giant story that's taking place, and that's the meta-narrative of our universe, right? So that's thinking of it in narrative terms, but also the idea that there's an overarching set of principles or ideas that give sense to everything that happens in this universe. Some guiding principles is a meta-narrative. And we talked briefly last time about how postmodernism in the 20th century is the philosophical position that there are no meta-narratives, that there is no overarching purpose or guiding principles or anything that guide the world that we live in. And we were talking a little bit about Nietzsche and how Nietzsche was one of the first people to say, if we are going to intellectually get rid of the concept of God, we are also getting rid of meta-narratives. And that means we are, and the language that he uses, powerful language, floating into an infinite nothingness. We can't tell up or down, things like this, because you have lost your frame of reference. If you don't know what story you are a part of, you don't know what you should do. It's as simple as that, right? And so that's the concept of a meta-narrative. And so a meta-narrative that includes God, if I were to ask you what's the meta-narrative that Scripture provides for us, what would you say? Start at the beginning?
Creation.
What's that?
Creation. Start with creation and work your way through to.
Yeah, right? And we can even start before creation. Before creation.
God existed.
What's that?
God existed.
God existed, and what was God like? Or what is God like?
Love.
Love, right? God is a God of love, right? He's a God of both mercy and justice, a God of order, right? Things like this. And that is the type of God that created this universe that we have right now. And when he created the universe, he created people. And what did he create people as? In his image. What does his image mean? Yeah, that's the primary thing, right? The idea that they would reflect his holiness in that they love God and they serve God perfectly, right? There's other aspects of image that we can talk about, but that's the primary thing, and that's what we're talking about when we say man lost his image in the fall. which means that he lost his ability to
Be holy.
be holy, right? And what was God's response to this?
Cast out of the garden.
Yeah, right? The rest of the story then is what follows as a remedy to that fall into sin, right? God promises he will send a Messiah that will forgive our sins, that will set things right. The New Testament is the story then that has happened. Now that story, it's not just a story, or it's not just facts that you hold in your head. These are the ideas and the principles that give shape to everything that you believe. It is a filter for understanding everything that you come across in life. Even the things that you say, I don't understand, you can at least say, even though I don't understand them, I know what? Yeah, that God is good. That all things are working out according to his plan, right? His will, which is a meta-narrative, right? So, a meta-narrative that includes God, creatures that exist eternally, and a way to be with God eternally infuses our universe with meaning and value. Without God, though, although we can call certain aspects of our life meaningful in that short-term sense that we've been talking about, we cannot call life in general meaningful. No God means no human nature, no objective morality, and so no objectively right way to live. And that's exactly what Nietzsche was talking about at the end there. And I was having this quick conversation with Linda before we started. Remember, Nietzsche is not a madman when he writes the parable. Nietzsche was writing about a madman. All right? And the point of that whole parable was not that God is dead. The point of that whole parable is that everyone knows that God is dead, but no one knows the implications that follow with God being dead. No one knows what's been lost if you believe that there is no God. And that's what Nietzsche is wrestling with. He is telling us if there's no God, then we have to, as a human race, change the way that we understand human nature, morality, how to live, things like that. So good. Any questions about this before moving on? There's one little article that I came across, or this book that I was reading, as I was working on a completely different thing, but I came across this through some of my studies for counseling and whatnot. And so this is a book that this one doctor wrote about addiction. And he had this to say about one area that he was looking at. So Michael Chandler and his associates at the University of British Columbia canvassed Native communities through much of Western Canada. What struck them almost immediately was the astounding suicide rate among teenagers, 500 to 800 times the national average, infecting many of these communities, but not all of them. Some Native communities reported a low of 0, true for 6 tribal councils, to a high of 633 suicides per 100,000. That's staggering, just so you know, like that amount, right? What could possibly make the difference between places where teens had nothing to live for and those where teens had nothing to die for? There's lots of different things we can talk about, obviously, but the interesting thing that this study focused in on, the researchers began talking to the kids. They collected stories. They asked teens to talk about their lives, about their goals, and about their futures. What they found was that young people from the high suicide communities didn't have stories to tell. They were incapable of talking about their lives in any coherent, organized way. They had no clear sense of their past, their childhood, and the generations preceding them, and their attempts to outline possible futures were empty of form and meaning. Unlike the other children, they could not see their lives as narratives, as stories. Their attempts to answer questions about their life stories were punctuated by long pauses and unfinished sentences. They had nothing but the present, nothing to look forward to, so many of them took their own lives. Your reaction, especially based on the stuff that we maybe been studying the last couple of weeks in regards to Ecclesiastes.
That's very true. It's sad, but it's true.
What's true?
Well, they have nothing. They don't have God in their life. They have nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, what's the point of living?
What don't they have?
They don't have God in their life.
Besides that, because the study isn't specifically
It's not
about
about God, it's about,
having God.
it's
No.
about the value of where they are. I mean, there's no continuity with a chain to start with. I mean, most of us, we've got our immigrant heritage or whatever that went beforehand. We have the story of our families and how they progressed to where we are. I mean, we have God in our life, and that's another part of that story. But for a number of them, you have nomadic people that are placed in that are in an area where that doesn't continue anymore. The corporate memory has disappeared.
Yeah.
So there's no link to an ongoing chain of my father and my great-grandfather and my great-grandfather did this and these are the accomplishments. So those are all decoupled in many of those smaller places. And so there's no reference, there's no foundation to come from.
Yeah.
So no
Yep.
place to start.
They seem to have lost their culture. I mean, if they have no history that hasn't been passed on, it's very, very bizarre because often those native communities thrive on that. They have stories to pass on and history and sounds like some of them don't have it anymore.
Linda.
With the residential schools too, it was a sudden end to how babies and children were even raised. The whole concept of family and how family functions was chopped dead in one generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the children that came out of there don't even know how to look after their own children because they have no example to remember back to.
Yeah. Very good.
Was this, I thought the study was looking at young, like more of a generation than an actual group of people. Like I know they talked about
It's
First
teen
Nations for a
suicide.
second.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not like specifically First Nations teen suicide.
This is specifically First Nations.
Oh, it
teen
is.
suicide.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't recognize that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's also their remote isolation that they live in, and they're only the environment is they're isolated, and human beings need contact with other human beings, and I think on an iPhone is not enough to get them acting like a normal citizen in today's society, so they feel cut off because, there's no need to live 5,000 miles away from nothing. I think that's a big problem.
I don't think it's necessarily just in that group or in that area for being isolated. You could be right here in Ottawa, and if you don't have family or friends or anybody to communicate with, you're in a dark hole. And if your kids come up to you to talk and you're like, sorry, I don't have time, I gotta get to work, or I've got a deadline, or you're not giving your children the time to explain things, or why did this happen, or be open with your children and explaining why your family either fell apart or how they got together or why they celebrate and why they don't celebrate. If you don't share all that information, you're just leaving them in limbo, and then they start wondering, what's the point?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Especially that last sentence, right? I mean, here's the thing. We can talk about, the study is looking at the idea of stories on many levels, right? So on the one hand, the kids that they're talking to, they don't have plans for their own immediate future, and as in they're not working towards getting a degree to do this job or that, or to start a business. They can't see their own small little lives as moving somewhere, let alone their lives within the bigger life of the community, because that's all been shattered in one way or another, right? So, and all of the things we've talked about play into this. The history of what's taking place, the economic, socioeconomic situation, geography. I mean, I'm sure there's studies that have tied that into that, but it's clearly not just a geography thing, right? There's all these things that play into it. But the bottom line is what the study is telling us, is that if you have no story that you are a part of, then you have no
Part to play.
no purpose. If you don't know that you are part of a story, then you don't have a purpose in life. You can't see yourself as having a purpose in life. And the tragedy then is, if you don't see yourself as having a purpose in life, then why even go through the suffering that you're going through, right? In order to understand the suffering that you are going through or to bear it, it certainly helps to believe that it's part of a larger story. And so the reason that we're not specifically bringing up God in this situation is because we want to use this in terms of an analogy, right? So in this sense, it's clear that the researchers have discovered, have put their finger on the fact that no story equals no purpose for this community. The same holds true when it comes to one's spiritual purpose, right? And that's the analogy that we're talking about. If you take then God out of the equation, if you're just considering life under the sun in all of its sin and all of its fallenness and in all of its screwed upness, if you're just considering it that and you do not have a larger story for it to be a part of, then you are going to view this world as purposeless, as meaningless. Does that make sense? So just a little bit, again, kind of an interesting way to tie it up. So again, I'm not saying that the reason specifically here that these suicides are taking place is because they're not reading Ecclesiastes. This is an analogy, right? I'm using it analogously. But I thought it's very interesting, right? No story equals no purpose here, and we're talking about it on a much more cosmic level. With that in mind, we are going to move into section 2. So wisdom is meaningless. Who is this gent? You know him?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson. What do you know about him?
Prominent scientist in the public science, atheist. He's an atheist.
Yeah, he is the most popularizer of especially physics and astronomy and things like that. And so he's got lots of different TV shows that he's a part of. If some late night talk show host is going to ask questions about physics or astronomy or the eclipse, right? I would like to see what his schedule was like the 2 weeks before the solar eclipse, right? But he's a poster child for astronomy and physics. He is also a poster child for maybe not brute atheism. He's not an antagonistic type of personality, but definitely a very strong scientific agnosticism to the point where he believes that religious questions aren't even important. They don't even count as knowledge. Only science. Maybe have you heard the term scientism before? The idea that only scientific facts, things that you can find through the scientific method, counts as knowledge. He would be a strong proponent for that, and he said as much at times. But what's interesting is there's a YouTube clip I'm going to play here. It's just some guy holding up a cell phone at one of his talks. But a 6-year-old boy, I think, asks Neil deGrasse Tyson at the end of one of his talks about whatever it was, what the meaning of life is. All right? And let's see if you can hear what he says here.
Okay, so wait, you have to tell everyone that, because if I repeat it, you'd think I'm lying. Okay, go.
6 3/4.
Love those fractions. Yes. Okay, if you're asking those questions now, you'll be the deepest thinking adult there ever was. So what is the meaning of life? I think people ask that question on the assumption that meaning is something you can look for, and then, I found it. Here's the meaning. Here's what it is. I've been looking for it. Okay? And it doesn't consider the possibility that maybe meaning in life is something that you create. You manufacture for yourself and for others. And so when I think of meaning in life, I ask, have I learned something today that I didn't know yesterday? Bringing me a little closer to knowing all that can be known in the universe. Just a little closer. However far away all the knowledge sits, I'm a little closer. If I live a day and I don't know a little more that day than the day before, I think I wasted that day. So the people who at the end of the school year say, this summer I don't have to think anymore. I'm thinking, what? To learn is to become closer to nature. And to learn how things work gives you power to influence events, gives you power to help people who may need it, power to help yourselves, to shape a trajectory. So when I think of what is the meaning of life, to me that's not an eternal, unanswerable question. To me, that is in arm's reach of me every day. And so for you, at age 6 3/4, may I suggest that for you, you should explore nature as much as you possibly can. And occasionally that means getting your clothes dirty because you might want to jump into puddles and your parents don't want you to do that. You tell them that I gave you permission. You know what else? You know what else? So, I'll give you more permission for more things. You ready? Okay. Have you ever pulled all the pots and pans out of the cabinet before and hit them with the wooden spoon? Have you done that yet? Have you done that? He said, in a way. And what did your parents say when you did that? Oh, you did it with paper plates. That's not nearly as fun as doing it with pots and pans. Okay? So you have my permission to pull pots and pans out of the cabinets and bang on them with spoons and knives and things. Not knives. Here's the thing. You're still a kid. And part of being a kid is exploring the world around you. And all the way the laws of nature influence that world. So take different pots and pans and hit them with a spoon, and they'll all sound different. They'll sound different with different spoons. Some pans are aluminum, some are steel, some are copper. They'll sound different, and that's kind of a fun experiment. And most parents will say, don't do that, you're getting them dirty. Stop doing that, you're making too much noise. You tell them, then why did you have me in the first place? Just remind them that they didn't have kids so that they could keep having a neat house, okay? Because kids make things messy. And there's a reason why they make things messy, because they're exploring the world around them. And so you have my permission. Now, if you get in trouble, I'm not going to be around. I'm not going to be back. But we have witnesses here, right? Okay. So your meaning in life will be enhanced if you're given as much freedom as you can to explore the world. Then when you get older, you will become so close to how the world works that when a problem arises that needs a solution, you will say, I know how to solve that. I've been thinking about that before. And I've been thinking about that ever since I was banging the pans on the kitchen floor, or ever since I jumped with 2 feet into a puddle, or ever since I walked up and down and caught snowflakes in my mouth as I walked down the street. Did you do that today when it snowed? When was the last time you caught snowflakes in your mouth?
All right, we'll stop there. What are your thoughts? There you go, the meaning of life.
Pretty trite.
What's that?
It's pretty trite.
Trite. Okay.
I mean, it's all very shallow when you look at what he's got to say. You create your own meaning. Therefore, the meaning that you create is the one that's valid. Okay?
If I were to ask you, what does Neil deGrasse Tyson say the meaning of life is?
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
Knowledge,
Pursuit
so
of
the
knowledge.
accumulation of knowledge just for its own sake?
For your own personal benefit.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of...
Yeah, right? He had two things here, right? To learn is to become closer to nature, he said, and it's to help people, right? He had lots of different examples of that, right? To help people. And so if you recall, we talked about different types of definitions for the meaning of life. Could someone read for us this moral meaning summary one more time?
The ability to say that life is transcendently or objectively good, or I can do good things. This depends on objective morality existing independent of whatever humans happen to be thinking is right or wrong. note that often when people say this is the meaning/purpose of life, what they mean is this is how you ought to live.
Yeah, and so did you see that somewhat reflected in the answer that Tyson's given there? What is the purpose, or how is it that you ought to live? What do you say? You ought to live accumulating knowledge, or I would assume maybe doing other things besides accumulating knowledge for the purpose of helping people, right? Helping other people, becoming closer with nature, things like that, so that you can solve problems in the future. And he had that great line at the very beginning where he said, if I have not learned something new today, then I have...
No, it's meaningless. Yeah, you haven't advanced.
Yeah, right? He said, I have wasted that day. He wastes his day if he does not learn something new. In other words, he is putting a moral structure on the pursuit of science. Right? The right way to live is to pursue knowledge. The wrong way is sitting at home like a couch potato doing nothing with your life, right? Not learning anything. We had this other definition, short-term terrestrial meaning. Can someone read that one for us?
As autonomous humans, we can choose for certain things to be meaningful and have value for as long as we value them. Before we valued it, it had no value. And when no one is around to value it, it will no longer have value.
All right, and so this is part and parcel of the way that he's defining the meaning of life as well. Because what did he say at the very beginning? How did he open his discussion about the meaning of life?
It's not something you find, it's something you create.
Yeah, it's not something you find, it's something you manufacture, he said, right? And if you're going to begin talking about the meaning of life that way, then you're talking about it having a lifespan, right? Or that it's something that is not something that is overarching or applies to everything. So we can begin to see how these things kind of apply, right, to the way that different thinkers talk about
One thing I'm
life.
noticing is that every answer in some way comes from I.
Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah.
So all goes back to the person speaking.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you start with I and you give a short-term meaning answer, that like it's what you create, and that's very politically correct that everyone can create their own meaning. But then it never ends there. Then it turns into what I created, and then therefore why that has so much meaning, and why you're turning that into moral meaning that somehow other people should think the way I do. When you can't jump there, like it's
Yeah, and
people
we're going
keep
to talk
bringing it to
about.
moral meaning, but they have no reason to take it past short-term meaning.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about trying to make that jump, how people try to make that jump of saying this is how you ought to live, especially when it comes down to things like what we would say again. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a proponent of scientism. This is the way that you find out real truth about this life, and there's a moral imperative to pursue these things. Now, we have to be very careful here in that even though we're saying, I think we're at this point in agreement that the pursuit of knowledge, brute facts, as he's talking about, can't be the grounds for a meaningful life, but as Christians, how do we feel about science? We have one scientist I know of, at least in the room right now, and we want to make sure we make this clear. Are we saying that science is useless?
No.
How does a Christian approach science? What do we see it as?
It's a way to review.
One
Jim.
of God's gifts.
Yeah? Can you say more than that?
Well,
God's gift?
Yeah, it's a valuable commodity that benefits the world.
Yeah, right. So the actual knowledge that the pursuit of science produces, right, that's a gift that God has given us, right, through the vocation of scientists. Good. Other things?
It's one way God keeps keeping the universe going.
Yeah.
It's everything has an order and a meaning. Right?
And so as a Christian, knowing the meta-narrative of this universe correctly, how does science fit into that meta-narrative?
It helps to understand what God has done for
Yeah.
us, right?
Yeah, right? So the reality of the situation is if God created this universe, and this is a God of order, that created a universe of order and beauty, and then he created his image bearers to live within this universe of order and beauty, what kind of faculties did he give his creation? what did he give us? The ability to do.
Science.
Yeah, right. To explore this creation of purpose, or this creation of order and beauty. And then what was one of the first things that he told Adam and Eve to do in the Garden of Eden?
To multiply, but also to take care of
Yeah.
this universe that I've created for you.
Fill this earth and be stewards over it, right? And if we are thinking of that term stewardship in its most robust sense, this includes exploring it, right? And reveling in it, and having fun in it, and discovering all of its secrets, and finding out all of the ways that we can find that mind and that fingerprint of God in everything in creation, and then seeing how God might have given some of these things to us for our benefit and for the benefit of the world he created. And so the reality is I try to stress this as much as possible, especially with my university students. God created humans, in a sense, to be scientists, and he created us in a perfect playground for scientists, the world that he gave us, right? But you only get that kind of meaning for the concept of doing science if you have the meta-narrative. That meta-narrative, again, it infuses value and meaning into everything we do, all the things that we hold dear, like science, right? I mean, this is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it's wonderful when our children do bang pots and pans, because they are functioning in a way that God created them as his stewards to learn about this world, right? So these are good things in isolation that Tyson was talking about. But without that overarching meta-narrative, it's hard to find how simply the accumulation of knowledge can lead to what we call meaning in life, or anything beyond this short-term meaning that's just something that you value for the here and now.
Can you imagine how depressing that philosophy must be if at the end of the day you haven't learned anything?
Yeah, and I've talked to a couple scientists about this. I've not talked to Dr. Bickle in the back about this, but you find every now and then these kind of sayings, the joy in science comes in the pursuit of knowledge. And I've talked to a couple scientists, and they've said, well, just tell that to a scientist that has spent his whole life only pursuing knowledge and has never really come to any solid conclusions, right? So yeah, I mean, it runs both. We understand this idea, right, that there's joy in the pursuit of knowledge, and we would as Christians, given the fact that God, in a sense, has created us for this, right, to be scientists and artists in this world. But yeah, good comment. Just real quick to move on then, so there's our definition of a meta-narrative, an overarching or transcendent story or idea within which all other stories or ideas fit and are legitimized. And again, the Christian meta-narrative would have things like the world was created for a good purpose, humankind and the forces of evil rebelled against God, God undid the plans of the evil rebels by sending Jesus. Who were the evil rebels again? You and me. Through faith, though, you are turned from an enemy into one of these rebels into an ally. And so all of life is infused with this epic meaning as God has purposed all things towards this goal of vanquishing evil, right? So again, this is putting it in this kind of story form for us, but this is your meta-narrative. This is the book that you find your chapter, the chapter of Linda, the chapter of Manfred within, right? This book of God's goal of undoing the work of Satan and the work of humans, right? Our simple work in this world. So yeah, with that in mind then, we're going to take a look then at this section of Solomon where he begins to dive into this idea of wisdom. And again, what do you know about Solomon? What did he write? What books of the Bible?
Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Proverbs.
Yeah, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs. The book of Proverbs, have you ever read the book of Proverbs? What are some of the themes of the book of Proverbs?
Wisdom is the biggest one.
What's that?
Wisdom is the biggest one.
Wisdom, yeah, right? The word wisdom is repeated over and over and over again in the book of Psalms, or in the book of Proverbs. And in fact, there's several chapters praising wisdom. But the wisdom that Solomon is talking about in Proverbs, how would you define that?
Spiritual wisdom.
Yeah, right. This is spiritual wisdom. It is the wisdom that is gifted to us, revealed wisdom from God that guides our life. Here in Ecclesiastes, at the end of his life, as he's reflecting back on his long life as one of the wisest men that ever lived, and the things that he pursued, and all of the wisdom that he collected, he's going to have a different way of talking about wisdom. And so what I want you to do right now is get in your tables and your groups, gather together, read Ecclesiastes 1, 12 through 18, to 12 through 16. So that is simply the sections that are printed out for you on page 4. All right? So those sections of Ecclesiastes are on page 4. And then in your groups discuss why is wisdom, that is knowledge about this world, meaningless or a source of grief. So he is going to have a very different tale to tell about wisdom than Neil deGrasse Tyson. If wisdom is meaningless or a source of grief, why aren't your professors miserable? All right? And then finally, how does believing the meta-narrative of Jesus change how you look at wisdom? Come up with 3 points to share. Okay? So I'll give you maybe 3-4 minutes to do that. Collect together. If you are on your own, find a table to join. If maybe someone can sit with Frederica in the back there and discuss with her.
So, reading this one?
Yep.
I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and explore by wisdom all that is done in the heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless and chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom, more than anyone who is ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also madness and folly, but I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief.
Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what had already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die.
Why is wisdom, knowledge about this world, meaningless or a source of grief?
That's what type of knowledge, right? Because science will never explain anything, right? Like think of C.S. Lewis said, like matter can't explain knowledge, like human nature.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. How does it lead to grief?
Oh, because then if you don't have fighting, wisdom is meaningless, there's some reason required. Well, it's because I guess if you change the meaning of life, then it's like the past Tyson changes like his purpose in life, so therefore it becomes meaning again.
He make his own meaning, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so he's not really getting meaning from his wisdom from what he's making up. How does believing the meta-narrative of Jesus change how you look at this?
But still end up going to big cemeteries.
We're just a small part of the overall
for the wedding or for the one stroke a week or two later.
We really don't change stuff.
There might be one generation
So we don't have to make our own meaning, right? Or are we supposed to read all of them?
Oh, okay. So there's a whole cemetery on top
When they say wisdom, they're referring, like, ecclesiastic wisdom is like scientific wisdom, right?
I think that's used differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I think it's pretty broad, so it could include scientific. And also because it's bringing the more knowledge, the more grief. But if you look at the scientific, no matter what we're talking about, no matter what we're doing. Yeah. So no matter how much you
Needs more time?
Need
more time, anyone? All right.
Material items.
Good.
want to share our point.
So if I can ask you to pick up a Bible, turn to 1 Kings chapter 4. 1 Kings chapter 4. That's page 527 in the black Bibles there. Or should get you pretty close there. 1 Kings chapter 4. And could I have a volunteer please read verses 29 through 34.
Was that fast?
1 Kings chapter 4, 29 through 34.
God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East, greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than any other man, including Ethan, and that's right, wiser than Heman, Calcah, and Darda, the sons of Mahal, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He described plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom.
Yeah, so what's Solomon being described as here? Yeah, right? Kind of like one of these Aristotelian scientists, right? Kind of a proto-scientist compared to what we have today. But classifying things, going through nature and learning about how things work. Yeah, so here it is, and describe the word you've got there, right? In verse 29, Solomon gave wisdom and great insight, and now all the examples of this wisdom and insight that he had. Now listen to the way that Solomon describes himself at the end of his life. Could someone else please read that, the verses we've got on the slide here?
I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief.
Yeah. So, and what I love about Solomon, again, the author of Proverbs, so throughout Ecclesiastes, he drops his little aphorisms, his little aphoristic proverbs throughout it, right? What is twisted cannot be straightened, what's lacking cannot be counted. So, you were discussing then, why is wisdom about this world meaningless or a source of grief? Why?
Well, we had said it's short term, and the more you search, the more frustrated you could get because you can't find the answers. And God even says the wisdom of men compared to God's wisdom is nearly non-existent. So it's that you'll never reach what you're searching for.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, right? So, if your goal is to exhaustively study a topic, are you going to be able to do that? No, right? Now, you can certainly add lots to it, but you're never going to be able to come to a point where you've said, as Neil deGrasse Tyson kind of had laid out, I now know everything that there is to know about X, right? So is that a source of grief? Yeah, I suppose. Good. Other thoughts? Other thoughts? Especially what he's talking about here. So maybe especially, right, this kind of chasing after the wind, right? How else is it grief? How else is... What's that?
It's like it's not tangible.
It's not tangible? Okay.
You can't get it all. You can't make it work for you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get it. If you have a job, your job gives you something tangible, but this gives you nothing. Nothing
Well...
tangible. Nothing you can use
It's like,
to enrich your life almost. You get it all and then it's just like...
Definitely the amassing of just abstract facts, right? We would say that with. But does science not lead to tangible things, right? Yeah.
What he's talking about is not necessary. Like the science itself. He's kind of like, what do you do with it? Like it's fun. I love looking at underwater movies.
Yeah.
Because I love looking at the fish, and I enjoy it. But then it's over.
Okay. All right, Linda.
If the whole purpose is to get to the end, well, obviously you're never going to get to the end.
Okay.
So therefore, you're guaranteed failure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at it in well, what I think of as a Christian, as you're benefiting others, you're seeing the complexity of God and how much He's way ahead of you, and you'll never catch up to whatever way you want to look at it, well then it's just reinforcing that for your strength of your life all the way through as a believer.
Yeah, okay. Good. Tara?
Whatever you're looking into, be it like one subject or another, but even if you've explored it all, you've figured it out right to the T, as much as you could ever know, is that going to be satisfying enough? And if it is, and that's the end of it, then you're just jumping to the next thing. So are you actually ever satisfied? You're going to just keep on searching for more. So if it's not in that subject, then you're just going to go to the next if that's the way your brain thinks. It's like, okay, well, I'm done that. That's done. Next. And then it just becomes a process versus how you're living your life.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly where it's useful to maybe talk about the short-term meaning, right, that Marianne brought up. There is certainly ways that you can feel fulfilled in what you do as a scientist, right? Why are your science professors not miserable?
Well, who said they're not?
Well, I mean, I know a lot of scientists that, like, they don't walk through life miserable, right? I mean, our friends and family that do not share the same meta-narrative with us, we know that they're missing out on something, but that's not to say that their lives are miserable. Why are scientists not living a miserable life?
Well,
in general,
Solomon's
let's say.
point here is not about that. It's about the stuff you've got italicized on here. Is that regardless of how much you know outside of that, there are fundamental things about people, about nature, about relationships that just simply don't change.
Yeah.
So you could know everything about how everyone is going to respond, but you can't change that person. You can't change that behavior. You can't change the way that society works. You can't change the basic nature of sin and evil and all that other stuff, regardless of how much you know and stand on the outside of it.
Yeah.
And that's fundamentally, I think what Solomon is saying is, he gathered all of this information. So in and of itself, it has value in knowing how creation works, how the world works, how people operate, what a good decision is versus a bad decision. But you still have no power over the lower level of that, which is those people, those things, those natural processes, those other things. And so in the end, all that wisdom you have around it doesn't add any extra meaning to it. It helps your understanding, but it doesn't change the fundamentals in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, right. So a lot of this has to do with what your goals are, right? So if a scientist is able to come up with some type of serum that helps, with a disease of some sort, that creates short-term meaning, right? There's no question about that. He has done something meaningful that affects lives, right? And so this is why scientists can derive a good amount of value out of what they do in life, because it is creating value, right? And it's creating useful value and very important value. And so that's why many are not miserable. But if you are looking for those accomplishments to give you different goals, much higher goals, much more transcendent goals, like lasting permanent value, like Tara is talking about, then you cannot accomplish that through simple accomplishments of the accumulation of knowledge. You add on to that the fact that even though you can maybe find some type of serum that is going to help heal a certain number of people from diseases, what as a scientist are you not going to be able to discover in regards to maybe
something to stop death?
Yeah, right? What is being said here? What is Solomon's whole point? What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. What's the point of this proverb? Why drop this in right here? Murray's on to it. In fact, you kind of said it.
Certain things you can't change.
What's that?
Certain things you can't change. That's death and sin.
You can help alter people's behavior in a certain way, but you cannot change their hearts, right? You can do certain amounts of behavior modification, but you cannot, no matter how much scientific research you do spiritual modification. Right? That comes from a completely different type of wisdom. You might be able, as a judge, to figure out laws that are going to help curb a certain amount of violence from happening in your city, but you are not going to be able to get rid of violence. Right? You can fight the war on drugs, but you cannot win the war on drugs, because ultimately, what's the war against? Yeah, human evil nature, which is twisted and which cannot be straightened, right? So there are certain things in this world that the accumulation of knowledge just cannot fix, and those are the types of things that that give us cosmic meaning, right? Or that we search for cosmic meaning in. But we're not going to be able to find it in individual vocations, including as a scientist, right? Somehow we have to look elsewhere. He's got this other one down here. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. In what sense, the more knowledge, the more grief?
So the more we learn about the fallen world, the more we're exposed to what's wrong, and so that makes us sad. So the more we learn about it, the sadder we get if we're realistic with what we're learning about. Yeah.
Perfect. Absolutely. This is from Luther's commentary on Ecclesiastes, and Luther's just echoing what David said. Anyone who sees much and knows how it is to go cannot help becoming angry. He thinks, oh, how miserably and dreadfully things happen in this world. What is the source of this anger and indignation except much wisdom? Right? I mean, if you don't want to be angry at things, there's a pretty simple solution to that. Just stay locked up in your closet at home and never talk to anyone. But the more you learn about this world, the more angry you will become. At least the more you learn about this world under the sun, the more angry you will become. Because all you are simply doing is collecting facts of a sinful world. And sin is a horrible thing, right? So for anyone who is very wise has many reasons to become angry, as one who daily sees many things that are wrong. Someone whose eyes are closed knows nothing, and does not become indignant. Therefore, learn to keep quiet, to commit the kingdom to God, and to pray, Lord, thy will be done. Otherwise, you will wear out your heart and your body, and you will waste time and eventually your life. So what's Luther's bit of advice for living at the end here? Put that into our own kind of colloquial.
Trust in God.
Trust in God in regards to wisdom. In what sense, trust in God?
Well, if He's going to make things happen, then you're not going to change much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of the quote last week from Lord of the Rings. To come back to that. But you know that there's great evil, but in those great stories, you know that there's a reason for it. In the end, it's like a passing shadow.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah, right? How miserably and dreadfully things happen in this world. Does the Christian agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes, and do you just end the conversation there? This is a miserable and dreadful world.
No, but there's something more.
How do you know there's something more?
Because Christ came into the world to relieve us of our misery.
And can you find that under a microscope? No, right? You have to find that wisdom that's beyond the sun, that wisdom that is only given through special revelation, to realize that there's more to this world than it's simply being dreadful. Does that make sense? It is dreadful, it is miserable, and the more involved you are in learning about this world, the more horrible you realize this world is. Right? Ask any counselor, right? Ask any psychologist, ask anyone that works with people at all. The more you work with people, the more fallen you realize this world is. The more you study nature, the more vicious you realize nature is as well, right? And so at the end of the day, it's going to be that meta-narrative that saves you from simply seeing this world as something that's miserable and dreadful. So again, science is wonderful in the sense that it can create this short-term meaning, right? In a short-term sense, you can find value in the fact that you are helping people, that you've got goals that you're trying to accomplish, short-term ones. But if you're looking to somehow explain how can I fix a world that in its totality is infected with sin, is dreadful and miserable, you're going to fall short, because what is crooked cannot be straightened. Let's just real quickly take a look at the final little bit from Ecclesiastes here. So then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise man has eyes in his head while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. What same fate? Death, right? So whether you are the wisest man in the world or the biggest fool in the world, you will both die, and the works of your life will both be forgotten eventually at some point. And so Solomon talks about this later on. This is in Ecclesiastes 9. I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it. And a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man, poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. And his whole point in telling this story is that the accomplishments of the wise under the sun, this world considered just in its sinful condition, not considered with the eyes of eternity given to you by God. The accomplishments matter nothing, whether or not you are the wisest man or the biggest fool. It doesn't matter, cosmically speaking. Of course it matters in a short-term sense. So do not go to your friends and say that their work that they do as scientists or as people working in the humane society or helping this or that the work that you're doing is meaningless. It's not. But you have the knowledge of the meta-narrative that gives their work more than just short-term meaning. You understand how the work that they're doing has cosmic meaning, that is infused with the epic purposes of God working through this world through his providence. But that's only revealed. Without that, the works and the accomplishments of this work are temporal and they're fleeting. So again, we thank God that we know this meta-narrative that makes the work that you do of epic importance, of infinite importance, because you are being called by the creator of this world, the creator of heaven and earth, to do the work that you find yourself in. And it has that meaning, the same value as what God gives to it. Sound good? Let's bow our heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for creating us as humans with artistic and scientific desires and sensibilities and skills. And we thank you for putting us in this beautiful world where we can be scientists and explore all of the wonders and might of your mind and be artists and create and do all this great stuff within it. But the more we learn about this world, the more we also realize that it is fallen, that it is a miserable place. Thank you more than just for science. Thank you for giving us your word that tells us that there is more to this world than meets the eye. Thank you for your above-the-sun knowledge that this is a world, although fallen, that is in your hand, that you are working for the good of us, your children, that have learned what you've done for us on the cross to defeat sin and death and the devil. And we pray that you infuse all that we do in life with that meaning as your children called to do works in this world, to be agents of your providence and agents of your love. In your name we pray. Amen.